everyone, Minutia Minute here. Not sure exactly when this video is going to post, but I'm recording this on November 1st. Last night I wrapped up the last film in my 2021 horror movie marathon. 31 days to watch as many horror movies as I could get through. I think most of the time people do 31 movies, a movie a day. I was actually able to do well beyond that this year. I had some time off in October. I didn't have a lot going on. I just had to burn some vacations. So I ended up watching a lot of movies. A lot of movies. I think my final tally was like 54 movies or 55 movies. 38 new horror movies I had never seen. I always try to do at least 31 new movies. And it's not too uncommon for me to go over the 31 movie mark just because there's movies I want to revisit, or I'm showing someone else a movie that I really like that I've already seen. But I always try to do at least 31 new movies, and I got to 38 this year, which was pretty exciting. So I thought it might be kind of fun to go through what I watched this year. If I have any thoughts, I'll certainly add in some comments as we go through. But at the very least, it would be nice to have a record of what I watched because, I was going through a lot of kind of schlocky stuff this year. And definitely more than once, I got the comment of like, why are you watching that? And it's like, well, I've already watched all the other movies. Like, you know what I mean? I'm running out of movies to watch here. Of course, that's not really true. There's actually a lot of movies I need to watch. But in terms of like American horror and American horror franchises, because I like to marathon during Halloween, not just like watch random movies. I like to kind of bunch them together in themes, which I think you'll probably see as I'm reviewing. It's getting to be slim pickings. So at the end of the day, I think it's going to be really nice to just start documenting these every year, just for my own benefit, so I can see what I've gone through and have it all a matter of public record. Now that's enough preamble. Let's talk about the movies themselves. So, the movies I watched this year kind of fell into four categories. There was a serial killer category. There was foreign horror, particularly Italian horror, although there were a couple exceptions to that, which I'll get to. There was rubber monsters, and then there was what I called Cult of the New, which is basically just like movies from like 2018, 19, 2021. Movies from the last basically like 4 or 5 years that I just hadn't gotten to, and so I threw them in just to make sure I watched some new stuff. I'm someone who a lot of times focuses on older movies and doesn't have any idea what's going on right now. So I'll be talking to people, talking about how I love movies. And they'll be like, oh, did you see this? Did you see that? And I'm like, it seems like I haven't seen anything, even though I've seen a lot, and probably a lot more than they have. It's just that it's all old, random stuff, as opposed to new stuff. So I did do a whole week of just watching newer movies. Now, some of them actually ended up fitting into multiple categories. So I'm not going to show them to you by category. I'm going to more or less go alphabetically through the list of movies that I watched. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about movies. So first up, we have Bird with the Crystal Plumage. I had never seen this movie before. Argento, the only movie of his I had actually seen was Suspiria. I have had a handful of Argento movies sitting on the shelf waiting for me to watch it. I think actually I was going to do Argento like 3 years ago, so I bought like a small stack of movies and didn't get around to it. You'll see in this list, for those of you guys who have seen some of my other movie rewinds, there's movies you're going to probably expect to see here that you're not, because I just have a constant backlog. You know how it goes as comic book readers, I know. There's always more stuff to read that you just haven't gotten to. But this was the year I finally got around to Argento. I had an amazing time digging into these movies, particularly his Giallo movies. Bird with the Crystal Plumage, maybe my second favorite movie of his that I've seen. The first favorite is coming up. I was really impressed with how well drawn the characters were in this. The plot twist at the end was really solid, and I thought that some of the stuff he does in this movie that repeats in a later movie around like the leading man and like kind of gender roles in horror slasher movies was very interesting. This, of course, predates by a very significant margin, the modern American slasher, but having gone through the Halloweens and the Nightmares and the Friday the 13th over the last several years. It was really interesting watching this because this feels so much more modern than those movies do, even though it's Italian and it predates Halloween by like 8 or 9 years. So Really fun movie to watch. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend checking this one out. Similar on the Giallo train was Blood and Black Lace, which is another Giallo movie that I hadn't seen. The only Mario Bava movie I've actually seen is Planet of the Vampires. I'm excited to spend some more time on him in the near future. Also a really solid movie, good mystery, not too convoluted of a solution. Looking at some of the later Giallo era movies, it's like kind of feels like everything's been done to death. So like, the Giallo's a man, the Giallo's a woman, the Giallo's multiple people. There's only so many different surprising directions you can go. This features multiple killers, but not in a way that feels overly complex like maybe some later era Giallos do, in my opinion at least. All right, switching gears into what would probably fall under the slasher genre, although I did kind of a mini marathon of this director this year, which I did with a friend who had never seen any of his movies, and that is Blood Harvest by director Bill Robain. I am a big Bill Robain fan, actually. Only in the last few years I've really come to enjoy his movies. It's one of those very much an acquired taste. They're kind of terrible, a lot of them, although this might be his best, most like relevant work. But he's from Wisconsin. I'm from Minnesota. I just connect with his filmmaking in a way because of the Midwestern element to it. And it's always impressive to see how he can do a lot with not very much. It's like he gets, some guy's North Lodge and he will film an entire movie in there with just local actors and some schlocky gore and a ridiculous script. You hear him talk about his movies and he'll be like, well, that was a complete brain fart. Like, you'll be watching a movie and you'll be like, this doesn't make any sense. And then in the extras, he'll be like, yeah, that part was a total brain fart. I don't even know why I did that. So it's just kind of fun. His most famous movie is from the 70s, which is the Giant Spider Invasion. It's one of those so bad it's good movies. But I actually really enjoy his 80s work, kind of his VHS era stuff. At that point, he had his own studio that he had built in Wisconsin, and he was kind of running a more well-oiled production machine. And I think this movie is kind of the pinnacle of that era for him. So if you haven't seen Blood Harvest, I actually would recommend watching this one. It might be a good entry-level one if you want to get into Bill Robain, because some of his work is pretty obtuse in how low-budget and home video-ish it can be. If you like Tiny Tim, he plays presumably a killer clown in this, but it has a pretty good twist that keeps the story interesting and fresh. Not very long of a watch, only like 90 minutes, 88 minutes, so can't really go wrong if you want to watch a scary clown. Next up, this movie was watched on October 1st because I had just gotten the Blu-ray. It was a movie I was really excited to pick up. I've only ever had it on Laserdisc. It's a movie I really like. I think it's really underrated. It's more of a thriller than like a horror Halloween kind of a movie, but I decided to include it just because I wanted to give it to you guys as a recommendation. And that's Jonathan Mostows' Breakdown, starring Kurt Russell. If you've never seen Breakdown, it just came out on Blu-ray. It was previously available on Laserdisc, VHS, possibly DVD. I'm not actually sure if it was. But this is just like a 90s action thriller from the director of Terminator 3, which take with a grain of salt, although like of the problems Terminator 3 has, like the direction isn't necessarily the biggest flaw. Like there's a lot of problems with that movie in terms of the script that as a director for hire, it's almost not really your job to fix those things. This is much more in his wheelhouse. I think, yeah, he is the screenwriter on it. It just feels like an old Hitchcockian style thriller. Kurt Russell and his wife break down on the side of the road, and his wife gets picked up by a truck driver to go to a payphone a little ways down the road. Obvious setup that leads you down what is ultimately, even though this aspect of it is played down in the story, a serial killer plot. So it does fit into the serial killer category of the movies I watched this month, so I figured to include it and recommend picking up the Blu-ray if you didn't know this was out or you haven't seen it. Definitely worth checking out. Paramount put it in its Paramount Presents line, so it's got a fancy slipcover and it's got some special features, so definitely worth a pickup if you're interested in a Hitchcockian thriller film. All right, back into European foreign horror. I watched Castle of the Creeping Flesh. This was not my favorite movie, but it was mildly enjoyable. This is a movie about people who are in a mansion and are basically reincarnated versions of people that lived in that mansion centuries ago. The big thing in this movie is you get to see an actual heart operation done on somebody. In the case of the movie, they're doing a heart transplant, but in the actual procedure that's filmed, the person's getting a pacemaker, which they actually show them putting a pacemaker in their heart, which really breaks the fourth wall and was kind of funny. But definitely, kind of Euro sleaze here. An actual heart operation, lots of TNA. If you're into that kind of thing, you might enjoy it. I thought it was okay. Now, I will say there is another film from this producer, Adrian Hoven, um, coming up in a little bit that I liked quite a bit more and was actually pretty high on my list of movies that I watched this year. Okay, next up, continuing the slasher serial killer theme and the Euro horror theme, we've got another Giallo, Cat o' Nine Tails, Dario Argento again, another movie that was really, really solid. The thing that stood out to me the most about this was how well the characters were drawn. I really liked the blind reporter and the younger reporter working together to solve this mystery. He's an old man that loves puzzles, and he gets super invested in helping figure out who the killer is. As far as the twist as to who the killer was, I didn't think it was as interesting or as exciting as Bird with the Crystal Plumage, but still a really, really solid Argento outing on this one. If you like him, definitely a movie worth picking up. All right, we have our first film in the Cult of the New category, which is Child's Play. I almost never watch horror remakes. I can't remember the last time I did. And this was one I refused to go see. My wife wanted to go see it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go see a Child's Play remake. I actually really enjoyed the Child's Play movies. They are schlocky fun. And I thought that the premise of this was interesting and different enough that maybe you could justify going to see it, but once you let one of these remakes in, you end up letting them all in. And there's so many crappy ones out there that I just don't want to, I don't want to go there. That said, it's been a couple years. People still tell me that it's pretty good. So I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. So the premise of this is instead of being possessed by a serial killer, Chucky is an AI development in a Bluetooth connected computer doll, basically. Obviously plays into modern fears of everything being interconnected and Bluetooth linked and all this stuff. I like that as a concept. I didn't really love it in execution, I'll be honest. It was a solid movie. It had a lot of great moments in it. I liked how it ended, where Chucky takes over all these different toys in the toy store. Makes for an exciting ending. But at the end of the day, it's a killer doll movie. And the more seriously you take it, the more you find yourself asking questions. The thing that's brilliant about the original Child's Play is it lets you know from the very top that it's schlock. At the very beginning of the movie, Brad Dourif transfers his consciousness into a doll. So automatically there's an occult element to it, there's a fantastical element to it, and it makes you question the logic of the plot less because it is a heightened reality. In this, it's played very straight, where, it's something that could happen to anybody in the current world we live in where everything's connected. But then as a result, of course, you're going to question every little plot element in it, and it's really, at least for me, it was kind of hard to get invested in the story. And I did find myself calling out plot holes in this movie. Now, they were minor plot holes, and I don't really remember specifically what they were now looking in hindsight. So this is probably a pretty solid movie. I don't know, it just maybe wasn't for me. I would probably watch it again at some point, maybe give it another shot. It was okay. So, for those of you guys who are fans of the new Chucky movie, sorry it didn't blow me away, but I didn't hate it, which among horror remakes probably is a pretty high compliment, at least coming from me. Next movie is a rewatch, Chud. This is a movie I really, really love. I showed this movie to my mom. This is a classic early 80s horror film that I would categorize probably in the Rubber Monster category of the movies I watched this year. This is, I think, John Goodman's first movie. It's got John Hurd, Kim Greist. Super simple plot, which is that radioactive homeless people are coming out of the sewers and terrorizing New York City. Oh, Daniel Stern's in it too, by the way. And with an all-star cast ahead of their time, giving great performances, and having it shot actually in the sewers of New York. This is just a little gem, so if you've never seen it, definitely recommend checking it out. I can't say as much for the sequel, Chud 2 Bud the Chud, which I had not seen, and added to my list this year. This movie's awful. I don't recommend watching it. Just stay away. That's all I'm going to say about it, because I got a lot more movies to review. All right, back in the slasher, serial killer, but also Euro horror ends of what I watched this year. I watched Deep Red for the first time. You're probably yelling at me saying, why haven't you watched all these Argento movies? I'm sorry, I just never got to them. Deep Red is simply a masterpiece. I absolutely loved this movie. I watched it right after watching Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which, spoilers, this movie is basically a remake of that, but done by a much more experienced director who's a master of the Giallo format at this point. And this is like the Giallo movie to end all Giallo movies. It's got fantastic characters, a great twist that obviously you see it coming if you've seen Bird with the Crystal Plumage, but still works really well here and has kind of a different twist on it. You've got the protagonist who's kind of like impotent, which is very weird for a slasher serial killer type movie, and his reporter, not girlfriend, who just has so much charisma. Also featuring a score by Goblin, who did Suspiria. I think this is the first time they worked together, if I remember right. I thought I remember reading about that or seeing that in the extras somewhere. It just made for a fantastic movie. Definitely a movie that deserves all the praise that it gets. And as a matter of fact, probably my favorite movie I watched out of all the movies I watched this month. Definitely my favorite Argento, but possibly my favorite of everything. All right, next up we've got another Bill Robain. This one, I don't know if it really fits into any category. Um, you might say it fits into the... No, it doesn't fit into the serial killer genre either. So it's really just part of the Bill Robain marathon. It's a movie that I showed to a friend, and it's Demons of Ludlow. This is just one of the 80s Bill Robain movies I really love. It's about a haunted piano that is terrorizing a small town. Similar to Castle of the Creeping Flesh, in which these characters are basically reincarnated versions of their former selves, reliving past experiences. I would say this is actually better done than that, which is saying a lot considering Bill Robain is kind of bottom of the barrel, but again, I've got a huge soft spot for Bill Robain. So if you pick between those movies, I'd recommend this one in particular. But yeah, fun Bill Robain movie if you like 80s straight to VHS movies. So next up is one of the two horror movies that I watched on Halloween. I specifically saved this one for Halloween because I was super excited to see it, and that was Don't Breathe 2. I loved the original Don't Breathe. I thought it was an absolute masterpiece. It was scary, it was surprising, and it's a movie that holds up to rewatches. The idea that a group of, basically teenagers break into this blind man's house and can't get out. And he's an ex-military guy that's killing them one by one. It's a plot that shouldn't sustain for 90 minutes, first of all, and should be riddled with holes. You should be able to be like, well, they could have gotten out here. They could have gotten out here, there. They should have done this. They should have done that. Don't Breathe 1 is really, really well written and does a really good job of setting up and paying off everything that happens during the movie. And so you really buy the whole situation and you really don't question how they can't get out of this house because everything is explained along the way. And everything the blind man figures out is explained along the way. So for those reasons, I just absolutely love the first one. I didn't see the second one in the theater, I think because COVID, although that came out. I don't remember why I wasn't able to get to it. I remember wanting to, but it was just busy. I can't remember. Long story short, I decided, well, I'll just save it. It's coming out on October 26th on 4K, so I'll just watch it for Halloween, which is what I did. Now, a part of me was thinking, there's no way that this is going to hold a candle to the first movie. It's one of those where not a premise you can repeat. And what I'll say in defense of Don't Breathe 2 is it doesn't repeat. There are elements of the first movie that are kind of peppered throughout the first half of this movie, but it does go in its own direction. The idea of Stephen Lang as a relatable character is very difficult to swallow. They do it by building up the sympathetic veteran element, so as opposed to old crazy veteran that's scary, he's old crazy veteran that's relatable because he has another veteran friend. He's got a kid now, which is pretty suspect, but it's explained throughout the course of the movie. And he gets kind of an interesting redemptive mark. He's still not a good person, but if you watch the two together, it creates an interesting redemptive arc, I think. I'll have to watch it again with the first one, like watch them both together to really finalize my thoughts on it. But overall, I did like it quite a bit. It certainly isn't as good as the first one. The big gap in this one is the villains, which, Stephen Lang was an amazing villain in the first one and very interesting, very relatable. Everyone has motivation in the first one, by the way, that is understandable and relatable. This one, the villains are like meth heads, and what they want to do is really over the top, probably a true story at some point, but it's still like a little eye rolling. And they're not sympathetic at all because they're just dirty meth heads, and that's kind of it. So for that reason alone, it can't hold a candle to the first one, but still a surprisingly solid sequel directed by the writer of the first one, which is part of the reason why I was willing to give this a chance and not just kind of automatically write it off. All right, next up we have what would be the rubber monster category, but it doesn't quite fit just because it's in CGI era Hollywood. It's Eight-Legged Freaks. I picked this up recently. I remember really enjoying this movie when I was younger. And kind of wanted to revisit it. It just came out through Shout Factory, so I picked it up and threw it on the pile. It actually goes with another set of movies that I watched later. So I think it does fit into the rubber monster category, even though this doesn't really have rubber monsters itself. As far as how this movie holds up, it's definitely showing its age. It was kind of a quaint, lighthearted 50s monster movie, which at the time was kind of a welcome change of pace. Now looking back on it, I don't know that it holds up as well. It is that Roland Emmerich, Dean Devlin thing where, their movies just aren't that great. They're very derivative. This one's no exception, although I would say this is better than many of the other movies that they've made. Just not by a ton. Probably the biggest highlight of this to me was the brief appearance from Tom Noonan, who I like quite a bit in this, but he's also gone 10 minutes in. All right, next up we've got a slasher